tourism. But where exactly are we with India's nationwide plans to inoculate?
Well, it is still very slow. 10 days ago, India's Prime Minister announced there will be free vaccination drive for all Indians above 18. Still, we don't see that happening in the next coming months, as the vaccination drive is still super slow. The reasons being that first, there is not enough number of vaccines to supply to the India's vast population, and secondly, there is a huge digital divide between rural and urban India. As to book a slot, we have to book it online, and 2/3 of Indians live in rural areas where forget about enough smartphones or laptops or the internet. Even a regular electricity supply is a luxury. So people are not able to book the slots. And also, experts are criticizing the government for not doing enough and meeting the demands for the vaccines for Indians. And it could lead to a third wave, which can hit India anytime between 6 to 8 months.
Navodita, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
The US has passed the grim milestone of 600,000 deaths to COVID-19. By far the highest official national toll of any country in the world. But as the country takes stock of the ravages of the pandemic, there is growing optimism that the US's world-beating vaccination drive is on the verge of heralding a return to normal. Catherine Viette has the story.
As the pandemic death toll hits 600,000 in the U.S., some states are moving ahead with plans to reopen. New York celebrating a return to normal with 70% of its population vaccinated.
The state mandates that have proven right and correct and brought us through this pandemic are relaxed as of today, effective immediately.
The White House has been stepping up efforts to get all eligible Americans vaccinated. Just over half the population has received at least one dose, and around 40% are fully vaccinated. Speaking on Monday, President Joe Biden urged everyone to do their part.
If you've not been vaccinated, get vaccinated. Get vaccinated as soon as possible. We have more work to do to beat this virus. And now's not the time to let our guard down. So please get vaccinated as soon as possible. We've had enough pain.
Also on Monday, Congress observed a moment of silence for those 600,000 Americans who've died from COVID-19. With this grim milestone, America remains the nation with the highest death toll from the pandemic.
Well, that 600,000 figure is really a tragic number. You know, a year ago, we really never thought we would get to that number, but it is here. And I think the people that are still getting sick and dying are those people that are not vaccinated. Quite frankly, the infection rate and the death rate amongst those people that are unvaccinated is just like it was a year ago.
Despite the staggering death toll, the number of people dying daily has decreased dramatically since the peak of the crisis. Proof officials say that vaccines are effective.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has made his first court appearance in a case where he's accused of spending twice the legal limit on his 2012 presidential race. Sarkozy denied any wrongdoing in his unsuccessful bid for re-election. His latest trial coming just months after Sarkozy was convicted of corruption in a separate case. France 24's Mark Perlman has more.
Accused of overspending during the 2012 presidential campaign, Sarkozy said, yes, there was overspending, but no, I knew nothing about it. He said, I was president at the time, I was running for re-election, I was busy all day long, I had no time to sign off on invoices, decide who would do the camera work, who would do the lights, who would do the sound during my campaign rallies. This was the job of my logistics team. I had nothing to do with this. He said that his campaign did not go crazy, did not go into overdrive as the election was nearing and as he was lagging behind his main competitor, socialist François Hollande. Nicolas Sarkozy said, "I'm innocent. This is really an accusation that doesn't stand." He risks 1 year in prison. The trial will last another week, and then the verdict will be handed out probably in September or in October. This is the second time Nicolas Sarkozy is in the Paris courthouse. A few weeks ago, he was charged with corruption and influence peddling, sentenced to 3 years in jail. A verdict Nicolas Sarkozy is appealing.
And finally, since the 19th of March, locals and tourists have been flocking to a volcano on the Reykjanes Peninsula, 30 kilometers southwest of the Icelandic capital. It's been spewing lava for 4 months now, with no one really sure when the eruption might come to an end. Great news for volcanologists, one of whom says he's discovered unusual egg-shaped lobes of lava within a new lava stream.
The base of the flow, we see little pahoehoe lobes that are oozing out in egg-shaped structures from the base of the flow, and as they ooze out, they form a crust of solidified lava, but they're still being fed from the inside. So the feed of lava from inside the flow breaks up these egg-shaped lobes and pushes them apart. So you get the structures that we see on the video.
Well, that's all we have time for right now. Thank you for watching, and do stay tuned. Coming up now, our special coverage of the Euros and a very reassuring start to the tournament for Les Bleus.
Hello and a very warm welcome. It's day 5 of the Euros. World champions France have just beaten Germany in a brilliant game in Munich. And here with me to provide analysis on that match is sports journalist Firas El Eshi. Hello, Firas.
Hello, Simon.
We'll also have all the latest on Portugal's victory against Hungary. Les Bleus have beaten Germany to take a huge step towards qualification. If France beat Hungary on Saturday, then they will almost certainly guarantee qualification from the group. 1-0 in that game, thanks to an own goal by Mats Hummels, Firas. But France played very well.
It depends on how you define well, because I think Didier Deschamps put all his money on playing a defensive game today. Something I find it difficult to understand. It worked out really well for him, and he had the 3 points out of this game. But with all that offensive potential forward, Kylian Mbappe, Griezmann, and Karim Benzema, yeah, you can do a lot more. However, good one point is for Didier Deschamps is he really saw the Germans coming. He really saw that they will perform really well and play the game the way they did. Everyone was talking about them being underdog, wounded, the end of a generation. I personally did not see them playing this well before the game, and they dominated the game from the first minute to the very end. However,
they lacked a centre forward, maybe.
Absolutely.
The missing presence of a Miroslav Klose type player.
Absolutely. That finish, that last touch, they just didn't have it. And yes, since Miroslav Klose, Germany's been struggling with a number 9. The most brilliant number 9 right now in Germany is Polish, and it's, Lewandowski. So, yeah, I think today made that point very clear that in the academies and in the Bundesliga, this has to be the priority for Germany, because oh my God, today couldn't be more obvious. Gnabry, everyone, Karl Havertz, everyone trying, but no, you don't have that Karim Benzema, that point that France had. No, the Germans lacked it.
Well, speaking of that French team, let's have a look at the starting 11 that France started this game with. Who was particularly impressive in this team here, Firas? We see there, as you mentioned, Kylian Mbappe, Karim Benzema, Antoine Griezmann, and yet France didn't have as much possession as we would have thought.
It was that line in the middle. I think the point and the plan was not to have the possession, was to let the Germans have the ball and yet play that defensive game. Obviously, it was like a point of desperation that was mounting for the Germans throughout the 90 minutes. And the more it got forward, the more the French had the confidence that they were winning this game, and the more desperate the Germans got. These three, Pogba, Kanté, and Rabiot. And I think thanks to Kanté, in many ways, Rabiot and Pogba played perhaps their best game this season. Whenever I see Paul Pogba wearing that blue jersey, I'm like, who is this person? Either he has to leave Manchester United or find something else, because in terms of quality, this is a world-class player. Whenever he's playing in Manchester United, there's a problem. I don't know if it's with the coach or the mindset, but the Pogba that plays with the Bleu, it's just a whole other person. And today was one of his most brilliant, most impressive games in terms of passing. It was always a matter of a nanosecond. That's why two of his passes that would have been assists ended up being offsides. Kanté is Kanté, obviously, and Rabiot was quite impressive. So the key today in shutting down the Germans, the key in locking the spaces and not finding solutions was that line, I think, for Didier Deschamps. Three world-class midfielders, and that's how they won the game today.
Well, speaking of France, let's move over and now look at the group standings in Group F, the group of death, the so-called group of death, with Portugal as well, defending champions Portugal, which we'll get to in a minute. But there we go, Firas. Portugal on 3 points, France behind them just on goal difference, Germany nothing. Considering that France play Hungary next, it's almost guaranteed qualification if they beat the Hungarians.
Yes. The questions for me are not about whether they move to the round of the 16, but the way they played today is a bit worrisome in terms of playing against big teams. If they play against England, I mean, choosing to play this in this defensive way, yes, it worked against the Germans, but we both said it's because they lacked that number 9. Against Cristiano Ronaldo, Diego Jota, and Bruno Fernandes, it will be a whole different story. They will make sure you are penalized for giving them the space. So if you're going to play against world-class teams coming for the competition to win the title, and they have that number 9, perhaps more than just one, how is it going to be? I think that's a question now that perhaps Didier Deschamps has to tackle in the locker room.
Very quickly, Firas, do you see him rotating his team against Hungary, or is he going to go and ensure the 3 points in that game?
No. I mean, in this game, the first substitution came in the 90th minute. So this is a guy, obviously, when things are working, he's not changing anything. He's not destabilizing anything. So I think, yeah, obviously he will continue with the same formation.
Well, you spoke about Cristiano Ronaldo, about Bruno Fernandes. We can now move over to Portugal, of course, who started their title defence against Hungary in Budapest. Victory 3-0 for the Portuguese side, thanks to a brace by who else? Cristiano Ronaldo. A little bit of a flattering scoreline, perhaps, though, Firas. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no, because obviously the game was 0-0 all the way till the 84th minute, I think. And yes, they struggled. But, you know, you see the coaching of Fernando Santos throughout the second half. And those 3 goals were not by chance. He read the game in the first half. He realized that it's not about pace and open spaces. It's going to be a game of closed spaces and, you know, playing in those spaces collectively. And I think he did that so well. 2 substitutions made a lot of difference. Rafa Silva and Renato Sanchez, I think, I give it to the Portuguese in terms of how they won 3-0 at the end. And I don't think it was by chance.
Well, Portugal have put down a marker, as you say, Firas, and head coach Fernando Santos warned opposition in the so-called group of death that they are up for the challenge. Take a listen.
Portugal is ready. Portugal is ready to play any rival. We knew Hungary would be difficult because they were going to have the support of their fans, and that was something to bear in mind. And we know Germany is a very strong opponent, a very good team, and an amazing manager. We know it's a difficult game, but I'm sure my colleague Joachim thinks the same. We know we're talking about 2 big teams, so we're not afraid, but of course we have a great respect for them.
Firas, now that we've seen everyone play in this Group F, do you see Portugal rivaling the likes of France for top spot in the group?
Yes, absolutely. This is a cup. If they were playing a league over 20 games throughout the season, I would say France will be the champion and just give them the title already. But when I say it's a cup, it will be played on days. If you're having a bad day, you're out. If you're having a bad half, you're out. And the Portuguese can bet on that. Moral will play a part. The psychology, the mental presence can play a part. And so when the gap is not that big between Portugal and France, I would say everything is possible because it will all be played over 90 minutes. So I see the Portuguese. I mean, the best example for this is the last final, where the French were the favorites. They were much stronger, and Portugal won the title.
And of course, they did so without Cristiano Ronaldo, but we can't talk about Portugal without talking about Cristiano Ronaldo, who is playing in his 5th European Championships and who has now surpassed Michel Platini as the highest goal scorer in Euros history with 11 goals. A remarkable record.
Numbers, numbers, numbers. First player to play 5 Euros. First player to score in all 5. As you mentioned, 11 goals, and that is a record. At 36 years of age and 130 days, he is the oldest to score a double, and he's with the most appearances in the major tournaments, the World Cup and the Euro, with 39 games after today's. This man is a legend. That's the simplest way to put it. The way he pursues the numbers, the way he pursues his goals, and the way he preserves his body at this age. He's almost, touching 37 of age and still plays, better than 22-year-olds and 23-year-olds. Combine that with the experience, you get an unbelievable player in Cristiano Ronaldo, inspirational.
And he was devastating once again against Hungary. Well, just before we leave you, because our time is coming up, let's take a look at Wednesday's programme. It's already the start of the second round of fixtures. One game from Group B at 3 p.m. Paris time as Finland look to build on their victory against Denmark as they take on Russia. In Group A, Turkey face Wales in a vital game for both teams, whereas Italy, the only side to have won in that group, are up against Switzerland. And I have the pleasure of saying that Firas and I will be back for that to catch all the analysis ahead of that evening kickoff. Firas, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for watching the France 24 Euro show. For now, stay tuned to France 24. Bye-bye.
In 2014, the Sewol, a South Korean ferry, was out on the open sea. On board, hundreds of people, including high school students, on a field trip.
As always, I said to him, I love you, have a good trip. And also, don't forget to call me. But that call never came.
The ship, which was overloaded, sank.
I heard some of my friends screaming and our compartment collapsed. We had no choice.
The rescue operation was catastrophic. 304 people, the majority of them teenagers, died in their cabins. Today, our reporters revisit the scene of the tragedy that traumatized an entire generation.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval on France 24 and France24.com.
It's here by the banks of Lake Geneva that these two veteran Cold Warriors meet. There'll be no reset button as Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin hash it out on everything from cyber hacking and election meddling to the rules of the global game in this post-pandemic world. Join us for full coverage right here on France 24.
The Debate on France 24 and France24.com.
En France 24 nos esforzamos por brindar la mejor información hecha por periodistas de Latinoamérica y del resto del mundo.
We look at how technology is shaping the future, and we show you the latest gadgets you can soon get your hands on.
نقدم لكم الاقتصاد بطريقة مختلفة، نبسط المفاهيم والمصطلحات كي تكتمل الصورة لديكم.
Aquí puedo hablar de medio ambiente, no solo de los problemas que afectan a nuestro planeta, sino también de iniciativas y soluciones que a veces no tienen espacio en televisión.
La différence sur France 24, c'est l'idée du reportage. Nos grands reportages, vous ne les verrez nulle part ailleurs.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
You're watching France 24, the main headlines for you today. An historic summit on the cards set to define Russia's relationship with the US under Joe Biden. Vladimir Putin to meet with Biden in Geneva, although both sides already playing down hopes for any major breakthroughs. I'll talk to our correspondent Felix Light. He'll join us from Moscow very shortly. The first airstrikes against the Gaza Strip under Israel's new coalition government. The strikes ordered after militants in the Palestinian territory earlier sent incendiary balloons into Israel. And at least 36 people have been injured, 3 critically after a car bomb exploded at a military base in a town on the Colombian border in what's been described as a vile terrorist attack. Good to have you with us then. We're live from Paris here on France 24. I'm Stuart Norval. Also coming up for you, alarm in England's theatres. The industry really demanding reassurances from the government after the latest pulling back from the easing of coronavirus restrictions. That's in the business news. And 1-0 to France as the team get the ball into the back of the net twice more, only to have the goals disallowed. A good start, though, for Les Bleus. So it was right back in 1985, in the middle of the Cold War, that US President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev met in Geneva for the first time, aiming to cut the number of nuclear warheads the two superpowers had amassed. Well, today, their modern counterparts, Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin, will come together in an historic new summit. Joe Biden hoping to set clear red lines to try to prevent the combustible US-Russia relationship from further deterioration. I'm always ready, said Joe Biden as he landed to prepare for a meeting expected to last around 5 hours later today. Observers noting the advantage, perhaps anyway, for Putin. It was Biden who requested the meeting. Well, let's cross then to Moscow. We're going to speak to our correspondent Felix Light, who joins us from there. So, Felix, perhaps Putin then going into this with a very slightly stronger hand?
Well, perhaps, but it rather depends on how you sort of see the situation in general. Certainly, Joe Biden, I think, would rather not be talking about Russia. He said sort of from the start that his big sort of foreign policy focus in his administration are on climate, are on China, and he rather sees Russia, I think, as a bit of a distraction. So in that sense, the very fact that the meeting is taking place and that Biden feels obligated to have it is perhaps a very slight advantage to Putin. But then on the other hand, Russia does need something from this summit. It has goals that it needs to take away. Relations, of course, have fallen to historic lows recently. And I think the Russian side are clear that this doesn't suit them. They don't want a war of words. They don't want diplomatic expulsions. They don't want this kind of unpredictability, this turbulence that has really engulfed the relationship. So I think there are key things that the Russian side are looking to take away from this summit as well. So the sides are perhaps more equally balanced than you might think.
So certainly Biden isn't going to give Vladimir Putin an easy ride, is he?
Oh, well, certainly not. We've seen sort of hints from both from sort of Biden spokesman and from the president himself that he's going to be bringing up things like human rights in Russia. and more specifically the case of the jailed opposition figure Alexei Navalny. Now, speaking to sort of Russian experts, that is very much the big fear, that if Biden focuses on sort of human rights issues, on the Navalny question, then that could sort of torpedo the whole summit, because the Russian position has always been that these are internal matters, these are sort of law enforcement matters, and that American involvement is very unwelcome, and that if Biden does bring up these questions, it could trigger a sort of emotional reaction and the collapse of the whole summit. So I think that the Russian side will be looking very closely at that and very sensitively at that to sort of see any hint that sort of human rights are becoming the main issue today.
Felix, thanks very much. Felix Light speaking to us there from Moscow. Well, Vladimir Putin has, of course, survived a series now of US presidents. Let's remind ourselves of his longevity in this from our international affairs editor, Armin Georgian.
Young and seemingly modern, Vladimir Putin initially appeared to the US like a man they could do business with. There was flattery and hospitality at George Bush's Texas ranch, and a fishing trip in bucolic Maine. But the bonhomie disappeared when the US invaded Iraq and removed a client of Russia, Saddam Hussein. After the Russia-Georgia war further strained ties, the Obama administration attempted a reset in 2009.
We worked hard to get the right Russian word. You think we got it?
You get it wrong.
I got it wrong.
Ominously, reset was mistranslated as overload. That's exactly what happened to the relationship when the conflict in Ukraine broke out in 2014. As with Iraq, Russia perceived the US pursuing a regime change agenda around the world. Ties deteriorated further when the Kremlin was accused of helping Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election.
Our goal continues to be to send a clear message to Russia or others not to do this to us, because we can do stuff to you.
At the D-Day commemorations, Obama and Putin's glances seemed to say just that. We know what you're doing, and so do we. The Russia file cast a long shadow over the Trump presidency. Trump seemed eager to please Putin at the Helsinki summit in 2018, but the Russian president kept his distance, dropping this vintage line.
Whom should you believe? Whom should you disbelieve? You can't believe anyone.
It's not just the 2016 election issue that caused turmoil. This March, US intelligence agencies claimed Russia tried to undermine Joe Biden in the 2020 election. That accusation might not bother Putin. After all, he's outlasted 4 US presidents.
Now, the first airstrikes against the Gaza Strip under Israel's new coalition government. The strikes ordered after militants in the Palestinian territory earlier sent incendiary balloons into the south of the country. Israel's Air Force targeting at least at one site in the south of the Gaza Strip. Israel saying its jet struck military compounds belonging to the Hamas terror organization. It came after a day of high tension in Jerusalem itself, as more than 1,000 ultra-nationalist demonstrators bearing Israeli flags poured into Jerusalem's flashpoint Old City, with scores of police deployed. Jean-Emile Jamin reports.
Nighttime in Gaza, and the familiar sight of explosions greets the horizon. This was the scene late on Tuesday, as Israeli forces launched airstrikes in response to incendiary balloons sent by Palestinian militants, the first flare-up since a ceasefire was signed at the end of May. The events played out after more than 1,000 ultra-nationalist demonstrators had descended on Jerusalem's Old City, all draped in the Israeli flag.
Many soldiers, as well as other people who were in terror attacks, have lost their lives for the Israeli flag. Therefore, it is our moral obligation to pay tribute and continue to raise this flag with pride and determination and without fear. We must not surrender to terror.
The march itself came just 2 days after Israel's new coalition government took over after 12 years of Benjamin Netanyahu's rule, signaling the first major test for current Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and his ideologically split government. MPs representing the first ever Arab party in the coalition responded, calling the Israeli-led protest a provocation.
The only legitimate flag here in Bab al-Amud and East Jerusalem is the Palestinian flag. The Israeli flag here is an occupation symbol and occupation flag. It seems that Naftali Bennett adopted the same decision of Benjamin Netanyahu. That's to say, there is no change.
Later in the evening, Palestinian demonstrators on the Gaza-Israel border burned tires in protest of the march. Hamas also warned of renewed hostilities while promising to defend the rights of Palestinians and the sacred sites of Jerusalem.
Now, one of the main contenders in this week's presidential elections in Iran has called for better economic and political relations with the West, his most extensive attempt yet to attract reformist voters. The former Iranian central bank chief, Abdel Nasser Hemati, along the 7 candidates allowed to be on the ballot for Friday's vote, the likely candidate for moderate and reform-minded voters. Well, meanwhile, the leading contender, though, remains Ibrahim Raisi, a conservative and hardline judge. And from Tehran for France 24, James Andre reports.
This is one of the rare political meetings to take place during this short campaign that was marked by the coronavirus pandemic. These voters have come out in support of Ibrahim Raisi. He is a hardline conservative, the head of Iran's judiciary, and he is widely seen to be the front runner in this election. He has been campaigning on a platform including economics, fighting corruption, and being tough on the West.
Ayatollah Raisi has served the people of Iran and sentenced many corrupt people, and both domestic and foreign enemies of Iran.
I'm 18, it's my first time voting, and I'm voting for Raisi.
Why him?
Because he's in line with the supreme leader, and he respects the principles of the Islamic Revolution.
Raisi's chances have been bolstered by the Islamic Republic's candidate vetting process. The Guardian Council, an organ close to the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, has approved 7 candidates out of nearly 600. 5 conservatives and 2 reformists. Mohsen Rafsanjani meets us at the museum dedicated to his late father, a preeminent former president. He was running as a reformist, but his bid was rejected by the Guardian Council.
I don't accept this disqualification, but there's nothing we can do. The decision is final.
Mohsen is disappointed, but still rejects calls to boycott the election.
People must vote and express their opinion. So these predetermined elections won't transform our Islamic Republic into an Islamic government.
59 million Iranians are eligible to vote this Friday, but most of the ones we've spoken to tell us they don't see the point since the reformist frontrunners have been barred from running. The authorities are now worried about extremely low turnout, and they're campaigning to make sure people go out and vote.
James Andre there. Now, at least 36 people have been injured, 3 in a critical condition after a car bomb exploded at a military base in a town on the Colombian border. The country's defense minister describing the blast as a vile terrorist attack that targeted soldiers. The initial blame being put on Colombia's largest remaining rebel group, the National Liberation Army, although dissident FARC rebels could also be responsible. Valerie de Camp reports.
The explosion occurred shortly after 3 p.m. local time. Authorities say at least 2 bombs detonated minutes apart after a man pretending to be soldiers drove a truck into the military base used by Colombia's 30th Army Brigade in the border town of Cucuta. A cloud of black smoke was seen rising from the facility as ambulances rushed to the scene of the blast. Dozens of people have been injured, some are in critical condition. Meanwhile, Colombia's defense minister has described the blast as an act of terror, adding that authorities are investigating the potential involvement of two rebel groups.
The initial hypothesis is that the ELN, the National Liberation Army, is behind this vile act. We are also investigating the involvement of FARC dissidents.
The government has yet to provide any evidence, but both groups have been accused of carrying out similar attacks in recent years. In 2019, the National Liberation Army set off a car bomb at a police academy in the capital Bogota, killing more than 20 people and putting an end to negotiations with the government. Despite signing a historic peace deal in 2016, a group of dissident FARC rebels who rejected the accord remain active and could be behind a bomb attack in the Cauca province last March. Both the ELN and the FARC are present in the North Santander state, the border with Venezuela. Criminal gangs are also believed to be operating in the area, smuggling fuel, drugs, and weapons.
Now then, the score. 1-0 to France after an own goal. Doesn't look necessarily like a fabulous game for France in the European Football Championships. In fact, though, well, it was, of course, a win and a match where France actually played very well, even getting the ball into the German net twice in the second half, only to have both goals disallowed. Good start, then, for the team who are perhaps the favourites, amid a night of high tension here in France for fans. Claire Rush reports.
Packed into Paris bars, French fans erupt into cheers as their side secured its first victory in the European Championship.
C'était tendu, mais c'était en même temps incroyable. On a eu le moment, voilà. Mais on était là, les supporters ils étaient là, tout le monde était là. On a eu chaud, mais on a gagné, c'est le principal. Allez les Bleus, bravo!
The match got off to a rocky start. Just before kickoff, a Greenpeace protester parachuted into the Munich stadium, striking cables and causing debris to fall before crash landing on the pitch. UEFA condemned the move as reckless, adding that several people were hospitalized for injuries. Once the action got underway, the first goal came in the 20th minute, an own goal from Germany's Mats Hummels that allowed France to take the lead. The error ultimately decided the game. France had two second-half goals from Kylian Mbappe and Karim Benzema, but they were both disallowed for offside calls. France's winning start to their Euro campaign came as a letdown for German fans, but many remain hopeful for the rest of the tournament.
Also ich fand, die Deutschen haben eigentlich relativ gut gespielt, aber die Franzosen waren einfach super stark. Aber ich habe dadurch schon Hoffnungen, dass die Deutschen doch weiterkommen und das Ganze vielleicht doch ganz gut machen werden.
More challenges lie ahead for France and Germany in Group F, dubbed the Group of Death. Both sides will have to face defending Euro champions Portugal, who won their opening match against Hungary 3-0.
Well done to France, the team feeling a little rough, I have to say, this morning. Very difficult to sleep when everyone's cheering outside the window. The main headlines, though, on live from Paris for you. An historic summit on the cards set to define Russia's relationship with the US under Joe Biden. Vladimir Putin to meet with Biden in Geneva, although both sides already playing down hopes for any major breakthroughs. The first airstrikes against the Gaza Strip under Israel's new coalition government. The strikes ordered after militants in the Palestinian territory earlier sent in